Good morning, welcome to Headline Focus here live on Core Politics with me, Rob Double. It is the end of the week, Friday the 19th of January 2018. Let's have a look at what's making the political headlines today. So to start off with, no special deal for the UK on Brexit. That's the lines coming from President Macron. He says that Britain would not be allowed full access to the European Union markets, including financial services, unless it pays into the EU budget and accepts all of its rules. That's the red line, which has been relatively consistent with what Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator in Brussels, has been saying as well, and clearly a point of contention in these negotiations. He said this, of course, after the summit, Anglo-French summit finished yesterday. Theresa May and President Macron were at Sandhurst Military Academy discussing many things, including military cooperation and border cooperation. And this obviously became a key component of the press conference after the main events. Britain must choose between a Norway and Canada option regarding a free trade deal. President Macron was also reported as saying so. Effectively, the UK needs an off-the-shelf solution and will not be getting a bespoke solution regarding Brexit. However, we should always remember that this is always pending negotiations. What is said by leaders and by the EU officials is always subject to what's actually made, the decisions which are actually made in the negotiating rooms, particularly as the months wear on and the deadline gets nearer and nearer. Usually what happens in the EU negotiations, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, and everything is resolved in those final few weeks and indeed final few hours leading up to the deadline. And so fundamentally, if the deal's going to happen, if people want a deal to happen, a deal will be found sooner rather than later. Good news as well, President Macron also said he doesn't exclude any sector from a future trade deal as well. So there's certainly a possibility, particularly for financial services, to get some form of free trade agreement for March 2019. Next up, there was another line which has come through in the papers today which has caught the imagination of the press, and that's from Boris Johnson. He's basically suggested that a bridge should be built across the Channel crossing between England and France. This would be a 20-mile long bridge, but he's quoted as telling President Macron yesterday that it was ridiculous that two of the world's largest economies were only 22 miles apart, but were linked by just one single railway line. Apparently, President Macron was actually open to this idea and responded positively, agreeing that a second transport link should be found. And Boris Johnson has got form on proposing radical infrastructure projects. Remember, he, of course, proposed Boris Island in the Thames estuary as a solution to the runway problems with Heathrow and Gatwick, basically building a massive new airport over in the estuary area. Channel Tunnel is about 20 miles long, as I said. The longest bridge in Europe currently is in Portugal, which is only 7.6 miles long. So just to give you a sense of the scale. However, bridges which are 20 miles plus aren't actually unprecedented. In China in particular, there are some bridges which reach over 100 miles long. So it is possible, whether practical at the moment is another story. But that makes the front pages in a lot of the press today. Finally, one more story then comes from, it's a little bit more down the agenda, but important nonetheless. Tuition fees will be reviewed by the Conservative government. Now, this was announced by Theresa May's new Education Minister, Sam Gyimah. He told an audience at the Mile End Institute last night. He said, if you look back at 2012 reforms when this current fee regime was introduced, I think it is right that we go back and see how it works across the system. However, Mr. Gyimah did make it clear that he did not support abolishing tuition fees altogether. However, what we could possibly see from the Conservative government is a reduction in tuition fees, in part to try and appeal to the younger demographics who have been stung with the raising of tuition fees a few years ago. What also indicates this politically is what happened in the reshuffle. Theresa May sacked or moved along a lot of the education ministers, the most obvious being Justine Greening, and that suggests a policy change by the government and some fresh faces and some fresh minds in the department as well. Former Chief of Staff Nick Timothy, former Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, I should say, Nick Timothy, has also been quoted as saying Justine Greening had been blocking a plan to cut tuition fees as well. Might be a further indication that that is on the horizon by the Conservatives. That's pretty much it for today, and indeed this week you're up to date. Don't forget you can find all the latest on what we're doing here on Core Politics on our Facebook page and Twitter right here. But from me and all the team here at Core London, have a fantastic weekend ahead.